let me open it up now to my colleagues on the committee for questions, comments that you may have. So the floor is open. And remember, there is the capacity to just click the box at the bottom of your screen to indicate that you want to raise your hand, and I will I'll recognize you.
Jim, I've got a question. This is Greg. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Greg. Go ahead.
All right. So my question is, in some form or other, I suppose it's for all three speakers. I'm especially interested in the process of
Greg, we're losing your question.
I'm not sure why. Can you hear me now?
Yes, it's quite clear now. Good.
So I'm especially interested in the process of public engagement that would precede a release, or in the language that Dr. Marshall, consent, the process of community consent. And I'm interested in the sense in which, the degree to which that process is a two-way process, and what that two-way looks like. I understand that there would be a capacity for the community to say no, but what I'm interested in is how far do you go in trying to push back against whatever misconceptions you might see in the community, misunderstandings, or maybe taboos that perhaps by your lights are poorly grounded, or and trying to straighten out the community's perceptions of the risks. And maybe Dr. Carvalho would be maybe if we could start with you, if that's okay.
Mr. Carvalho, would you like to take that one? No? One of the other speakers?
Oh, sorry. I was mute.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Carvalho.
No, I was saying that all the process for the community engagement that we tried to do here, I mean, was try to make it as clear as possible and try to focus the way of speaking, or try to find the best words or this kind of stuff for each kind of community. Of course, we are working with international scientific researchers from Oxitec also, but in Brazilian experience, we decided that we, as also researchers, and with the people from Moscamete that was from the press releases, were helping us to find the best approach to get to the community, or to the politicians, or to any group that was needed to be engaging in the process, or in order to get the approval, or from the CTNBio, for example, or from the community itself, from the community leaders. So I don't know if I made it clear or I answered the question.
Dr. Marshall or Dr. O'Neill, do you have any comments, any thoughts on that on Greg's question?
I'm not clear if I got all of it, because the audio was breaking up for me. But in our work in Australia, where we did our first releases, we spent nearly 3 years doing community engagement before we did an actual release. And in that period, that interaction was really about listening as well as about talking, a lot of listening, and trying to understand what community concerns were, and actually undertaking scientific research to address questions the community had rather than ones that we as scientists had. And it was through that process that we built the critical ingredient, which was trust with the community. And with the trust, we obtained authorization to do the work. And I think that was and as we've gone on and built that trust, it's become easier and easier and less intense engagement required.
Uh-huh. Yeah, interesting. Dr. Marshall, any thoughts from your work in Africa?
Yeah, I would agree that trust is a very important factor, and often when we do make decisions, then it's, all of us, it's often based on trust rather than something necessarily rational. I think it's very important that communication is long-term, as Scott was talking about, and that we have a long-term understanding. In some cases, it could be modular, so that different aspects of the project could understanding could build upon the prior ones. There are some quite complicated concepts involved in genetic control techniques. So if you first communicate the basic science and then build up from there, that could be helpful. I think another point with the concerns is it would be great to involve local communities in risk assessments. So risk assessments, you get a bunch of people from very different backgrounds to contribute potential risks of a technology, and those can be the scientists, they can be politicians, they could be musicians, artists, but it would be really great to include as much as possible perspectives from the local community members, and then those concerns can be addressed in a systematic way.
Terrific, thank you. Other comments, questions from other committee members?
Hi, this is Lisa Tannehill from the University of Maryland. You guys can hear
Lisa?
me, right?
I can, Lisa.
Great. My question is the following. I was just curious as to whether or not any other studies have been done to track the changes of other organisms in the areas in which you've conducted studies in which mosquitoes have had their populations suppressed. I'm curious about it from the standpoint of effects on other animals that might feed on the mosquitoes or other things the mosquitoes might feed on from the biodiversity standpoint.
That can go to all three of you.
Okay. So in Brazil, what we saw, we were also collecting other species of mosquitoes in our traps, mainly the Digi trap. So we were collecting a lot of Culex quincke fasciatus, and what we saw is that the population didn't change at all. For example, I kept those numbers in mind. We captured like 32 females of Aedes aegypti from one period of one of those experiments that we were doing, and we get 35,000 Culex quincke fasciatus in the same period of those releases. So, but according to other animals that could feed on them, the areas that we were working were extremely dry, and there were almost no other predator that could survive only feeding with the mosquitoes. So, but to be honest, we didn't look for those ecological aspects because we are always in very dense urban areas. In Itaberaba case, and for the other village, it was very isolated in a more rural area, mainly with crops. So, but I'm not sure if in the previous study in Cayman Island, Vivoxitec made some studies regarding this. What I know is that they were doing lab studies to see if other animals could eat these mosquitoes, if they could die also, and they didn't.
Dr. O'Neill, Dr. Marshall, any thoughts on that same question from your perspective?
Well, from our technology with Wolbachia, we're not actually suppressing the mosquito population. And so the idea of emptying up a niche that would be filled is not really relevant to our technology. But actually the regulators in Australia were interested in the opposite effect, that if we were putting Wolbachia into mosquitoes that protected against viruses, might we see an increase in the Aegypti population. And so we've been monitoring those issues, and we haven't seen that at all. We haven't seen any increases in Aegypti numbers related to Wolbachia introductions. But we've also been monitoring in our trapping other mosquito species that we get to see whether there might be any shift in relative abundance, and haven't detected any at all.
No, that's a great point in turning that question on its head. John Marshall, any thoughts from Africa?
So I think that this is a great question to include in a risk assessment. Whenever people have concerns about other effects on other parts of the ecosystem, then that can be addressed scientifically. My understanding with Aedes aegypti, which I guess would be the subject of that question related to riddle, would be that in many of these places it's actually an invasive species, and it also has a very low biomass. So I'm not aware of published scientific studies, but from word of mouth I've heard that it's not a big part of the food chain there. Another interesting point is that these technologies are species specific, so there are many different species of mosquitoes, and riddle would just reduce the density of one of them, while insecticide usage reduces the population sizes of a whole host of insect species. So environmentally and ecologically, it probably is going to have a small impact in those other interventions. Although the most convincing risk that I've heard in terms of reducing Aedes aegypti populations is that it could leave a vacant niche for Aedes albopictus mosquitoes, which are an alternative vector of chikungunya. So there are potential ecological risks that should be considered, and ways to deal with those.
Interesting. Really good points. We have time perhaps for one more quick question. If there's a committee member would like to ask one or comment. I don't see any hands raised at the moment, but nonetheless, jump in if you wish. All right. Hearing none, since we have just one more minute of time left, let me draw this to a conclusion by thanking Dr. O'Neill, Mr. Cavallo, and also Dr. Marshall. That's just terrific presentations, raised a series of really interesting issues, and they're going to be very, very helpful to the committee.